Hello and welcome to part 19 of this Kerbal Space Program 2 For Science video series, making our way through the exploration mode in the For Science update. So in the last video we did the Stargazer Point stage of our, Kerb-wide tour missions, and in this video we're actually going to be, we're going to be doing the first of a two-leg mission as well, because I like to try and do multiple, missions in one flight. Now, I know it's been a couple of weeks since I did my last video. I was, I'd like to try and get them out every week or so, but sometimes, it might be 2 or 3 weeks between videos. And the reason this time is because I've been having a bit of work done on my house. I've been having a brand new floor put in, which means that, it's not very conducive having, workmen in the house too doing recordings. So that's why it's taken a couple of weeks to do this video. But anyway, yeah, in this one, what we're actually going to be doing is we are going to be going to Eve, because, originally I was planning on doing the, the little chonk, or the little chonker and big and husky missions, which require us to land a 300-ton lander on Juna and a 200-ton lander on Minmus. And once again, I'd like to do that in a single flight. Now, it would be easy to do them in 2 separate flights, but me being me, I decided I wanted to do it in a single flight, which means that the rocket I'm trying to build is a relatively complex one. I'm just stubborn, so I'd like to get a couple of extra bits of science for it, or a couple of bits of tech for it, which means we need more science. So I had a look at the the mission control building to see what missions we have at the minute. Obviously, we need to submit the Stargazer Point report as well, so we'll just get that one quickly out of the way. And then, I was having a look at our secondary missions, and I realised what we have is we have Looking Inward, which requires us to enter Eve's sphere of influence, and that'll give us 3,000 science. And that is a pretty simple mission. We literally just have to fly past Eve, and it's done. We don't even need to get into orbit around Eve. And the other one is, where is it? A Frosty Mug, that's the one, which requires us to enter Eeloo's sphere of influence, which gives us 8,000, which is a pretty decent amount, although because we're getting quite high up on the actual, tech tree, it's not that brilliant in the long run. We won't get that much for it, but I decided, why not try and do those 2 missions in a single flight? Because, like I say, all you need to do is fly past them. You don't even need to get into orbit. So if we go to the tracking station, I'll explain exactly what I'm going to try and do during this flight. So, like I say, what we're going to do is we are going to be going from Kerbin, and we're going to be flying to Eve, which is that planet there. However, if we want to go to Eeloo, it's this one here, and you might think that Eve is near the sun and Eeloo is all the way out there, so how can you do that, going to Eve first and then to Eeloo? It just, you'd think it'd take a ton of delta V. However, what you can do is you can use gravity assist to go from Kerbin to Eve, then back to Kerbin, do a couple of passes of Kerbin and Juna, which will, get you up there. That'll then take you up to, Joule, and then via Joule, you can actually get all the way to Eeloo without actually using all that much delta V in the long run. Now, Matt Lown did do a video where he used the tier 1, not even tier 1, but node 1 parts. So the very first node you get on the game before you've unlocked anything, he used just the parts in that node to go all the way to Eeloo and back to Kerbin. Which is an interesting video to watch. It's a little bit tedious because it's quite long, it's nearly an hour, and as Matt does, he quite often just goes off on tangents, just randomly ranting about things, so it can be a little bit hard to watch at times, and he does seem to miss out a few key points. But I decided, since when we get to Eve we have a ridiculous amount of delta V left, instead of orbiting Eve and leaving our probe there, what we could do is we could do all of the gravity assist and go up to Eeloo, and it is actually possible to do basically a grand tour of the entire solar system. I think it's a grand tour. The only one which we might have an issue getting to is Dres, because we won't be using that to get up to Eeloo, although it is possible to get to Dres from Eeloo, but we'll see how that bit of the mission goes. And then there's another part of the rocket, it's a 2-stage kind of probe in a way. I've set the transfer stage up to be controllable so that we could use that to get down to Moho, and that way we should be able to get a fairly hefty bit of science off of this flight. Let's have a look at the actual rocket we are going to be using. So yeah, this is the rocket we'll be using for this mission, and it is a pretty simple rocket for me. My rockets over the past few missions have been getting more and more complicated, and you know, the one for the actual Little Chonker and Big and Husky missions is also a pretty complicated rocket. So I decided I wanted to do something really simple, which is nice because this is such a simple rocket. You know, the game performs almost flawlessly when you're flying it, which is brilliant. And it does have several bits of science on. So if you've seen the build video, you'll know that we have radiation surveys on this, and we also have the you know, a couple of little science juniors and the little sniffers as well. Because we are going to be going down to the surface of Eve as well in this video. So yeah, this is the rocket we're going to use, so we might as well actually think about getting ourselves to Eve. So the first thing we'll do, you'll notice that the science button or the experiment button is flashing, and like I said, that is because we have radiation surveys on this, and we've not done a radiation survey on the surface of Kerbin yet. So we'll click that, and then naturally what we need to do is we can get rid of these because we've already done the environmental data, so we can just hit remove all. What we need to do is we actually need to get into the correct transfer window before we actually do any of this. So we'll go to the map. We can do this because we're still on the surface and we haven't actually, you know, we've still got the full warp capability. And we'll zoom out and we'll get Eve into the correct transfer window. So for that, we'll find Eve, which is that one there. We're going to set that as the target just so that we know which one's which. And essentially what we want to do with Eve is we want Eve to be around about 45 degrees behind Kerbin. So if we imagine this is a clock, we've got Kerbin at 3 o'clock, that's the 6 o'clock point. We want Eve to be somewhere around about 4:30ish, maybe a little bit before. So yeah, let's get that set up. So we'll do a warp and get ourselves in position. You can see automatically we've got that radiation survey, so we'll just save that for in a little bit. We don't get a huge amount of science from the radiation survey on the surface of Kerbin, because obviously it's Kerbin, but as we go to various different planets we will start to get fairly decent chunks of science for that. So yeah, let's get ourselves into position and then we will be ready to launch. So that looks like I might have gone a little bit far there actually, which can cause an issue. I think actually no, we might be just about the right position there, because like I say, we want it to be around about 45 degrees, and being a little bit before is actually better. So yeah, now that is set, we can go back to the rocket and we can start thinking about our launch. So as usual, I've put the engine and the launch clamps in a separate staging group, and the reason for that is obviously if we were to put them in the same group, then there is a chance that the rocket could drop down on the pad when we launch. So that's why I do that. But anyway, yeah, let's get into the launch. So we'll hit the staging button, and we could wait for the you know, the countdown. But I'm just going to hit the staging button again to get that out of the way, and then again to decouple the clamps. And then we'll first of all hit up on the SAS control wheel, and you'll notice that the experiment button is flashing again because we haven't done a radiation survey above Kerbin yet. So we'll do that. We'll get rid of the extraneous information, and then we'll roll the rocket so that we are pointed towards the 90-degree line on the nav ball. And I did get a comment saying that you don't have to do this, and I know you don't. You can just rotate the entire rocket in the the VAB to actually get it pointed in the right direction. But it's just something I like to do. It's a personal thing. Like I say, you don't have to. If you don't want to be faffing around rolling a rocket, then you can, like I said, just point it in the right direction in the VAB. Anyway, now we're above 2,500 metres, we'll reset the SAS and we'll start pitching down range. And as usual, we're going to make sure the level indicator, or the little dot in the middle of the level indicator, is pointed at the bottom of the green prograde marker on the nav ball. However, there is another way we can get into orbit, and what we can do is once the prograde marker has reached the 85-degree line or circle on the nav ball, we can then lock the rocket to the prograde marker. And what that's going to do is it's going to basically mean that the rocket will follow the prograde marker as it slowly makes its way down the nav ball. Now, I don't usually do that because I believe it's called a gravity turn, and I don't usually do it because depending on the rocket and the thrust to weight ratio, sometimes you might find that the prograde marker will move down the nav ball too quickly and you'll end up in a very shallow trajectory, which just makes it very difficult, almost impossible to get into orbit, and sometimes you'll even find yourself burning up in low atmosphere. So it's just something I prefer not to do, but because this rocket has quite a high thrust to weight ratio and it's quite light, we can do that. But yeah, now that this stage is reaching 0 delta V, we'll get rid of that. We can see that there was a bit of overheating at the top of the rocket, which is a bit of a bug because the fairing is supposed to prevent that, but you can see it's gone away. It's almost straight away because we're getting quite high up in the atmosphere. But anyway, yeah, once we reach 85,000 meters above the surface, in fact, no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to 100 kilometers, but I'm going to start off by going up to about 110. And the reason for that is when we are going into orbit, we are going to be dropping our periapsis down by about 10 kilometers. So if we go to 110 kilometers in our apoapsis, once we do our circularization maneuver, it should bring our orbit down to about 100 kilometers. And I'll explain why I'm doing that in a moment. But yeah, now we're in our suborbital trajectory, we can jettison the fairing and hope it doesn't break anything, which it didn't. And now what we can do is we can go to the map and create our orbital maneuver. And it's just going to be a standard orbit, you know, just using the retrograde, prograde and radial out arrow just to try and get ourselves into orbit. Right, so yeah, now that is done, it's got us to a 105 kilometer orbit. We can point ourselves at the prograde marker on the nav ball. One benefit about going to a higher trajectory or suborbital trajectory as well is you do get more time to create your maneuver. But the reason I'm going to 100 is because the delta V map that I use actually calculates the the transfers from 100 kilometers above the surface. So it kind of makes things a little bit easier, and I also like to be circular because it means that once we create a maneuver and we start moving it around our orbit to get it into the correct position or to get the correct transfer, we're not like getting higher and lower, and it just makes things a bit simpler. But anyway, yeah, now we are up in space, we can actually do some more science. So we'll hit the experiment button to do another radiation survey in low Kerbin orbit. We'll get that out of the way. We can also think about extending our solar panels as well, and we're not going to extend these ones just yet. We're going to go for the ones on the main rocket, and if you've seen the build video, you know I have those in an action group, and action group 2, which is that one, and it also opens up the the antenna as well. But anyway, yeah, now that we are coming down to 0 seconds on the timer, we'll go to full throttle and get ourselves into orbit. And as with any burn, you can warp, and as I've said before, I'd recommend going no higher than 10 times warp or the 4th arrow. Buggeration. Right, yeah, I keep doing that. That's something you need to watch out for, is you can overdo it quite easily, and you can see it's now brought our apoapsis all the way up to 213, which I personally don't like. I don't like being in an eccentric orbit when I'm about to do a maneuver. So I'm just going to go to retrograde and circularize ourselves. You know what, since our periapsis is at 100 now, what I'll do is I will go to the periapsis. So I'll click on the orbit just ahead and time warp to point. Then once there, we'll do another retrograde burn and just bring our apoapsis down to 100 kilometers. There we go. So yeah, like I say, I prefer to have my orbit circular just because it makes creating manoeuvres a little bit simpler. So anyway, like I say, we now need to be thinking about going to Eve, which is all the way over here, and we've already got it targeted. So when we are going to Eve, it is an inner planet. What we want to be doing is we want to be actually burning retrograde to Kerbin's direction of travel. So you can tell which direction Kerbin is travelling in because of the thicker grey line. So it's going in that direction, so we need to be burning in that direction. Because obviously in all of our other videos we've been going to higher planets like Juna and Joule, which require us to burn prograde, but this time we need to burn retrograde. So normally we would put our manoeuvre node on this side of our orbit, but obviously if we're burning retrograde we want to be putting it on this side of the orbit. So I'm actually going to place it here just behind where our ship is. We'll create the manoeuvre there. and then we'll zoom back out again. We'll focus on the sun or Kerbal. Then if we click near Kerbin, we can bring our maneuver node up and we'll just do a prograde burn until we actually get down towards Eve's, orbit line. Right, so you can see we are relatively far apart, which means that our transfer window probably isn't 100% perfect, but we'll see if we can't get them a little bit closer without using too much fuel. So we'll zoom back into our ship, we'll focus on Kerbin once again, and then if we detach the camera and point it at the maneuver node, we can zoom right into the maneuver node and that'll give us a bit more fine control over our adjustments. So we'll highlight that, we'll right click on the maneuver node to bring up these buttons and grab the 2 arrows on the top, and that'll help us move it around a bit. And yeah, I think what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to do a bit more of a burn because we seem to be going quite far back on our orbit. But we'll see if we can't get an encounter doing this. And yeah, I don't think we are. So we're going to need to do a bit more of a prograde burn. So we'll just pull inwards on the retrograde arrow until the 2 markers get close together. We'll keep moving it around and see if we can't find an encounter. So obviously Eve is at an inclination in relation to Kerbin. So that's why we weren't getting one just then. There we are, there's our encounter. So yeah, that's pretty good to me. So obviously all we need to do now really to complete this mission is to do that burn and then pass through Eve. However, as I mentioned earlier, what I'm planning on doing is actually sending the probe, this bit, on a trajectory back up to Kerbin so we can use gravity assist to get up to Eeloo. But we'll be doing that in the next video. But yeah, first of all, let's have a quick look at our trajectory, after we leave Eve. So we'll flatten out our orbit with, Kerbin. We'll focus on the sun so that it makes things a little bit simpler. And as I say, we'll flatten out Kerbin's orbit, or Eve's orbit, not Kerbin's orbit, that's the one we want. Which is this one here. It's slightly difficult to tell because we're not targeting it, but it's that one there we want to flatten out. So we'll flatten that. We'll zoom in a little bit, and what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and make sure that our projected trajectory leaving Eve is lined up with Kerbin's orbit, because you can see it's quite low there. So we'll see if we can't do it now, but if we can't do it now, we'll do it during a mid-course correction, because there's a good chance that faffing around too much now will actually, we'll lose our encounter. So let's see what this does. So that seems to be doing quite good. We've still got our encounter there, so that looks alright to me. And our height is pretty good as well. It's bringing us back up towards Kerbin. Let's have a look at our encounter with Eve. So we'll focus on that. Oh yeah. That's about as tight as you can get, is that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move ourselves in a little bit further, just so that we've got a better opportunity of actually getting Eve. And this is probably going to change our inclination a little bit, but we can fix that during the actual, mid-course correction. And we're only just skipping through Eve's atmosphere with this, or sphere of influence with this particular burn, because we aren't going to be going, well, like I say, we want to be decoupling the actual probe before we get to Eve. So we'll set that up, we'll point ourselves at the manoeuvre and we'll perform this burn and get it out of the way. Then, like I say, we'll do a quick mid-course correction, and then we'll do a second mid-course correction as well to get ourselves nice and low, but we'll deal with that in a moment. So as with any burn, doing a transfer, I would recommend doing it on the map screen, because although we do have the burn gauge and that doesn't always work, and we have the timer, if you're doing a transfer, especially when you are just touching the atmosphere or the SOI like we are, you really need to be paying attention to the actual target body, because it's very easy just to go straight through. So yeah, we'll get ourselves down to 0 seconds on the burn timer. Go to full throttle, and like I say, we'll keep an eye on the orbit until our actual orbit line turns up, and then once it starts to get close, we'll reduce the throttle and manage our burn until we actually get an encounter with Eve. there's our trajectory. So once again, we'll reduce the throttle once more. I'm going to cut it briefly. I'm going to zoom into Eve. And like I say, we're going to watch this until we actually get our encounter. There we go. So I'm just going to go a little bit further. Oop, see, we went too far there. So we'll use RCS just to boost back slightly and get ourselves actually encountering. There we go. You know what, that'll do it. So we'll get rid of that manoeuvre and we'll have a look at our trajectory. So like I say, what we want is we want to be coming back up towards curbing to get our future gravity assist. And then we are just going to make sure that our actual trajectory is flattened out. So to make this a bit easier, what we'll do is we'll right click on curbing. In fact, let's focus on hub and we'll zoom in a bit so that we can actually get curbing, because we've got quite a few different bits around here now which we'll end up accidentally selecting. There's curbing. Yeah, we'll set that as the target so it highlights the orbit and it makes it a little bit easier doing this particular manoeuvre. We'll start off by creating a mid-course correction halfway between curbing and Eve, and we know we're on the correct orbit line because it only highlights half the line. If it highlights the full orbit, then what that means is it would be doing a full orbit basically. So we need to highlight there. We'll create a manoeuvre there. We'll zoom in a tad. We'll flatten out curbing's orbit. In fact, that looks pretty good actually, yeah, so we don't really need to do anything with that. So now we could actually jettison the probe, but we'll do that in a moment, because the first thing we're going to do is we're going to warp until we are in high curbing orbit, which we are already. We will hit the science button and do that science. And once that is out of the way, what we can do now is we can actually transmit all of this science, because we don't need it. It's only 320 data, which isn't a lot, but it just clears up the actual the research inventory once it's all been transmitted. We are going to be doing quite a lot of science during this flight. So now that's done, we can remove all and clean that up. And as I say, we will start off by just warping outside of Kerbin's SOI. There we go. So now we can actually think about jettisoning the probe. So the game is lagging a bit at the minute for some reason. Not sure quite why it's doing this. I'll tell you what, before we jettison the probe, we'll do this bit of science and we will double check our trajectory again, just to make sure that we are definitely flat in relation to curbing. As I've said, we are wanting to come back up to curbing and do a gravity assist. Yeah, that looks alright, although our apoapsis is a bit low, but we can fix that later on. We'll probably do that in the next mission. So yeah, let's get this bit of science out of the way. I'm also going to turn the lights on the probe, just so it looks right. And then we'll do a quick warp just to get that science out of the way, and then, like I say, we will jettison the actual probe. So that's that done. We'll transmit it. We'll clean up that, and now we want to jettison the probe. So as I said, basically if you look at the staging stack, the probe is actually in stage 4, whereas if we were to just hit the staging key now, we would actually be getting rid of the bottom part of the rocket, which still has 627 delta V in. So we're not going to do that. What we'll do is we'll just move stage 4 down to stage 3. We'll do a quick save just in case we make a mistake, which we shouldn't do, and then we can jettison the probe and get it on its way. So I'm just going to increase the throttle a tiny bit just to get ourselves away from the actual main rocket. I'm also going to extend the solar panels so that we won't run out of energy. And yeah, now, like I say, this probe is on its way back up to Kerbin, and in the next video we're going to be doing lots of gravity assists to get ourselves up to Eeloo, but that is basically done now. We can basically forget about that. Because, as I said, this is essentially a secondary probe. So let's get ourselves going a bit closer to Eve. So we'll zoom out, we will create the manoeuvre again because it's cancelled it. Yeah, we'll create a mid-course correction halfway between Eve and curbing. And I did have another comment a few videos ago basically saying, would it not be cheaper to create a manoeuvre close to curbing and then do the mid-course correction? However, I did try that, and this manoeuvre is probably only going to cost about 40-ish delta V, whereas if we were to do it right in front of where we are now, it would cost over 100 delta V. So it's definitely cheaper to do a a mid-course correction mid-course, which is why it's called that, like I say, halfway between where you are and where you are targeting. But anyway, yeah, let's get ourselves actually going down towards Eve, and Eve's atmosphere is actually, I believe it's a 90 kilometre high atmosphere, so we want to be going no lower than that. In fact, I'm going to go to about 100 kilometres above the surface, just to give ourselves a little bit of leeway. But like I say, we aren't even planning on circularising, because we are going to be sending the main stage back down towards Moho, because we want to try and get some signs from there. So let's get ourselves down anyway to start off with. So 35 is way too low. However, we're going to need to faff around with our inclination anyway, just to make sure that we are going down towards Moho. So for that, what we'll do is we'll zoom out, we will set Moho as the target this time, and we will check out our actual trajectory. So you can see the inclination is way out at the minute. Now, what would happen is, once again, with any gravity assist, you need to make sure you're going around the correct side of the planet, because if we go around, well, let's focus on Eve again, if we go around this side of the planet, what's happening, you can see it's lowering our trajectory, whereas if we were to go around the other side of the planet, like this, you can see it's actually raising our trajectory in relation, because we're coming there and it's bringing us back up again, and we want to be going down towards Moho, so we definitely want to be on the left side of the planet in this case. So we'll get ourselves back around that side again. We'll try and see if we can't match our trajectory to Moho's, or our inclination, should I say. Once again, like I say, we'll do that out here. We'll focus on Kerbal. And we're just going to faff around, because you can see it's at quite a high inclination is Moho. So we'll get as close as we can. It doesn't have to be perfect, because it's not going to be ideal. We can use like the radial arrows and so on to try and change things around a bit. And it can be quite an expensive manoeuvre. The more input you have, basically, the worse it can get. But we'll see if we can't get this into a relatively close inclination with Moho. I think what might have happened here is we might have gone around the other side of the planet, so let's have another look here and see what's going on. I'm going to focus more on Eve rather than anything else. So yeah, let's bring ourselves down. We're at about 100 there, that should do it. The inclination is not desperately bad, but it's not brilliant. It's not very easy to match the inclination of a planet like this, but we can always do an inclination change when we get out there, because you can see it's actually only at 5.9 degrees, so it's not going to be a huge inclination change when we get to it, and then we'll be able to get our encounter. But we'll do that later on. We might even do that in the next video. But anyway, yeah, now we're down towards 100 kilometers. We will get this maneuver out of the way. And it is only a 1 second burn is this, so what I'll do is I'm going to reduce the thrust limiter to about 5%. I'm going to reset the manoeuvre again so that it actually updates. So we'll do that just by clicking on it. But yeah, it's brought us back up again, hasn't it? Oopsie, what happened there? There we go, that's what we wanted. So yeah, we'll get ourselves back down towards 100. We don't have to go this low, it just because we are sending something into Eve's atmosphere, I want to be relatively low just so that we don't have to burn too much. In fact, I'm going to go down to about 95. So yeah, that's that set. So now what we can do is we can warp to this manoeuvre and perform the burn. And you see now it's actually giving us a 26 second burn, which is much more manageable than a 1 second burn, because it can be very easy to overdo it and make a right mess. But yeah, let's get ourselves there. We've still got 3 hours left. We'll do 2. And because we're not doing a transfer, we can actually do this burn from the flight view. Anyway, the timer has run out before the actual burn timer did, so let's go to the, let's go to actually to Eve and have another look at that. We can get rid of the maneuver now. Have a look at this and see what our we're still at 972, so we'll just do a little bit more of a burn and get ourselves, like I say, down to about 95-ish. Oh, went too far, so we'll use RCS to bring ourselves back up. There we go. So yeah, now that is set, we can actually get into we can get to Eve. So where is our encounter? It's all the way over here. So we will, focus, or we'll find the correct orbit line. You can see that because the orbit line in Eve's SOI is highlighting when we mouse over that bit, we know that we are just inside of Eve's SOI. So we'll time warp to point. And there we are, we have completed that mission, because we have just entered into, it looks like the probe itself actually isn't even going through. Oh well, but yeah, we've got that mission with this one, so we'll have a look, and we can see Eve is right there. And while we're here, now what we'll do is we will open up the cargo bay. So we'll get that one open, and like I said, what we've got here is we have, it's a bit difficult to see because it's not, we're in a bit of an awkward position, but we have a small kind of descent pod here which we're planning on sending down into the surface and getting some more science from down there. But speaking of science, while we're in high orbit above Eve, we can hit the experiment button and get that one going. And now we will warp until we start to get down towards Eve's, in low orbit. And now what we want to do is we want to, once again, we've still got loads of fuel in this stage, haven't we? That's it's lasting longer than I expected is this stage. So what we'll do instead is we'll move number 3 down there. We'll quick save, and we will, let's think about this. Yeah, we'll jettison that and get it just going on its way. We'll do a quick warp just to get it out of the payload bay. Now what we can do is we can use the square bracket key to switch to this, and what we'll do now is we'll start setting up our entry burn, and it's very much like if we were re-entering into Kerbin's atmosphere. We're going to create a manoeuvre a little way ahead of the periapsis, and then we're just going to burn these tanks until they are completely empty, and we're going to get our periapsis down to about 50 kilometers, and the reason for that is this ship is so light that if we were to go much higher than that, then most likely we'll just end up skipping through, and then we'd have to keep going around. It's called aerobraking. It's an actual technique, which is a perfectly valid technique, but to save a bit of time, I'm just going to go straight in and get it all done in one go. So we're at about 50 kilometers there. So now we can point this at the maneuver, and then we'll walk to the maneuver and perform this burn. And now, as I said, we're just going to burn this tank until it's empty, so we could do another warp, and yeah, we'll get it done nice and quick. Now, it is a real shame that we're going to be coming in over the, the dark side of the planet, because I was thinking just now about trying to get ourselves into orbit and then coming in over the low side of the planet, but the Delta V on the main rocket is really, it's just plain silly buggers at the minute. Yeah, I've decided not to do that. But anyway, now we are on our entry trajectory. We are just below 50 kilometers. You can see that we're actually in low orbit around the, Eve. However, we're not going to do the science on this because we don't have the radiation surveys. So what we'll do is we'll go back to the map. We will right click on the other ship and hit control, and we'll do the science with this. and we'll leave that to do its thing. But while we're here, we're also going to transmit the data that we actually currently have, because if we were to try and transmit all of this data on the other pod, we'd probably end up using up most of the energy, and even though there is an RTG on there, we do need most of the energy on that pod to actually transmit the atmospheric survey when it comes to it. But anyway, yeah, we'll get that out of the way, and then, like I say, we'll go back to the other pod and we will get our actual entry done. So we'll remove those, we'll go back to the map, and we'll switch to this one. Then, like I say, if we come onto the research inventory, you can now see that we have all of the other science, but that's been transmitted now, so we can just remove all, and we only have the samples. And it is a shame in this mission that we aren't going to be going back to Kerbin, because it does mean that we won't be able to recover any of the samples, and we will get quite a lot of samples when we go down into Eve. But anyway, yeah, that's all that we need to be worried about. So what we want to do now is we want to make sure we are pointed retrograde, because if we were to enter the atmosphere in any other orientation, we would flip out and burn up. We'll also get rid of the manoeuvre, and now we can warp until we actually enter the atmosphere. Right, so now we're here, we're going to cut the warp, we're going to bring up our, in fact we're just going to quickly hit the research button. We'll get rid of that, and then what we're going to do is we're going to bring up our parts manager and open up the little sniffers, because both of these are now doing science over the foothills. So what we can do is we can cancel one of them, and then once the biome changes, we'll then start the science on that. And we might not get any other science for any other of the actual you know, biomes. We might not be over them long enough, like we're over the seas now, so we'll try that one. But fingers crossed, we should be able to get all of the science for the actual, you know, foothills, because that is by far the most common, you know, biome on this planet. Yep, there we are. So fingers crossed we'll actually get this. And you can see we are coming in quite hot on this entry, because we're coming in quite low from an interplanetary trajectory. It would be easier if we were coming in from an orbital trajectory. However, like I say, we are going to send the other probe, or the other part of the rocket, down to Moho, so we're just going to leave that as is. And just one important thing to note is that if you've seen the build video, you'll know that we made sure this was balanced. In other words, the centre of mass was actually in the centre of this, you know, this pod, because it does have two little sniffers, as you can see, and Science Junior on board. And those are uneven weights, so if you were to just have left them basically just inside, because they're clipped into the tank, if you were to have left them as they were, it would have been unbalanced, at which point this would have flipped out during the descent and it would have blown up, you know, and we don't want that. We want to try and get as much science as we can. Anyway, yeah, now we are about to, you know, finish our entry. We can start thinking about deploying the parachute. And I think what I'm going to do, because this is going to actually slow this thing down to about 2 meters per second, is I'm actually going to right click on the parachute, go to deploy settings, and I'm going to reduce the deploy altitude to probably about 250 meters, which should give us plenty of space to actually you know, open the parachute and slow down enough to get down to the surface without having to wait too long. But that's just something that I'm going to do now, like I said, just to save a little bit of time. Anyway, while we're here, we're also going to turn off the you know, SAS, just so that we're not using up too much of our energy. Although, like I said, because we have an RTG on here, it will keep steadily recharging the batteries. But let's go back to science and have a look at our little sniffers and see what's going on here. We're over the shallows at the minute. Looks like we haven't finished our foothills science, which is a bit of a shame. So let's quickly reset this. Where are we? Reset that one and start it again, so at least we should be able to get the science for one of the biomes, because like I say, if we were to have left it, then there's a chance that we won't even get any science for either of them. So we'll just make sure we're going to be going over one of them, because we are going pretty much straight down now, which is why we need to make sure that we are definitely doing some science, because it's going to take more than 2 minutes to get down to the surface. But anyway, let's do a warp and get ourselves down. Right, so that is the atmospheric survey done for the shallows, and like I say, we're not going to be able to get the foothills one on this one, I don't think. But what we can see, if we come down, we can see that the science for the shallows, we've got 600 atmospheric data, and we have 1400 samples, which once again is a shame because we're not going to be able to recover that. However, we are going to want to transmit this data straight away because, as you can see, it's nearly 2 minutes to transmit, and it takes 456 units of electricity, which is why we needed so many batteries on board, just to make sure that we had more than enough, because if we'd have just left the single extra small battery on top, then we wouldn't have had enough energy and we wouldn't have been able to basically transmit it in time. But anyway, yeah, let's set this to transmit. We'll reset the warp because we are getting a bit of lag there. But yeah, like I said, that's going to steadily transmit, and as I said, what's going to happen here is it's going to transmit this science up to the ship that's currently passing over, and then that will transmit it all the way back to the KSC. And there we are on the surface. As you saw, I reactivated the SAS just to regain control over the actual pod because it was rolling around like crazy, which obviously we don't want. But yeah, now we're on the surface. Let's have a quick look at our science because obviously we are still transmitting, I think. Yeah, we've still got 20 seconds of that. While we're here, we can actually do some science from on the surface because we do have the the Science Junior on board. So we'll hit that, and you can see now what that's given us is it's given us 1,000 environmental data and 1,000 environmental samples. So we've got nearly 3,000 samples on board this. But as I said, because we aren't going to be returning this, we're not going to be able to actually claim that, which is a bit of a shame. But, that's what happens. Anyway, yeah, let's transmit the science from the actual, this one, which is only 60 units. So we've got plenty of, energy left over. And, while we're here, because there's not much to see in the dark, is there, we're going to do a warp to get ourselves into the daylight so we can actually have a look at what Eve looks like in the daytime. Yeah, like I say, it's quite a nice planet to look at, is this. Although the surface itself is a little boring, the actual atmosphere is gorgeous, I think. I love the colour purple. Yeah, it's a pretty cool planet. Like I say, it's a real shame that we couldn't have come in over the day side of the planet. But the next time we come to Eve, we'll see if we can't come in over the day side, because we are going to need to get into orbit around it anyway. So we'll make sure we do that and get the beauty shots that way. But yeah, that is pretty much everything there is for this particular part of the flight. So let's have a final look at our science and make sure everything is set. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. We've got rid of all of our data, so we can remove that. And we could actually just delete this now, but I'll leave it here for the time being. But yeah, like I said, that's everything for that part of the flight. So obviously, as I mentioned, we have 2 ships going around now, which is when things are going to get slightly more kind of complicated, which is where mods can come in handy. I don't know if I mentioned earlier, but in the last video I was discussing the idea of downloading some mods, and I did have a suggestion saying that the Maneuver Editor mod and the Alarm Clock mod are pretty good. Although hopefully those will actually come in later on in a future update as standard parts of the game. But we are going to just leave it as an unmodded series, this one. I might do mods in the next series, which I'll probably do when the the next major update comes out, which I think is Colonies. But like I say, for the next video, what we'll be doing is we will be sending this thing, which is our main probe. We'll be sending that all the way out towards Eeloo, doing several gravity assists via Kerbin and Duna and Jewel, and then on the next one, we are just skipping through there, aren't we? Yeah, on the next video, at the beginning of the next video, like I say, what we'll be doing probably to start off with is we'll be sending this thing, if it shows up. Oh, that's strange. We seem to be having some weird graphics issues at the minute where it's not showing up the ship, but that should come up later on in the actual mission. But anyway, yeah, like I say, wait a minute, we're on the wrong one. What's going on here? Let's try this again. Oh, there we go. Oh, it was just lagging, wasn't it? Just a bit of game lag. Anyway, as I was saying, we're going to be sending this thing down to Moho, and we'll probably also see if we can't get it to go all the way to the sun as well, because it does have quite a bit of fuel in, even though it's saying 0 delta V, and like I say, for some strange reason the game is playing silly buggers with this thing. We do have still quite a bit of fuel left, so we should at least be able to get to Moho, and if not, as I say, maybe even see if we can't get down towards the sun. But yeah, like I say, that is everything for this particular video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like it and subscribe, and maybe even leave a comment as well to let me know what you thought, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.